Back now on America Talks Live, where our most important programming content comes from you. As I have said, a case in point, before we get to our next guest who's standing by on Skype, we're coming to the phones. 1-877-639-7629, 1-877-NewsMax. We go to that critical state, round on the ends and high in the middle, Ohio. Gerald is on the phone. Hi, Gerald.
Hey, how are you?
Doing fine, thanks.
Yeah, I really enjoy your show.
Thank you.
What I'm wondering is how, after over 200 years of practicing government, we still have two completely contradictory ways of how to establish it.
Well,
you got an answer for that one?
Well, let's see. Let's drill down a little bit. Are you talking about two competing visions, two political parties?
Yeah.
What exactly?
Well, two competing visions, the Democratic and Republican parties.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Gerald, because some would say this last election proved that what is going on is that the American people actually make this division differently, not between Republicans and Democrats, but between a Washington establishment and the rest of the country. And so some say that is the reason for Mr. Trump's victory in the presidential column, and perhaps the two parties may be chastened. Indeed, Guy, third time I mentioned his name today, Michael Reagan was with us the other day. He said basically that Donald Trump is an independent, truly an independent, who happened to receive the Republican nomination. So we have that dynamic at work, but there will always be differing philosophies. To the cynics who say there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two major parties, I would point out, in general, away from the establishment notion, the Democratic Party essentially believes that government has to be the agent and the catalyst of change. The Republican Party says, no, we don't need to look to government. We need to look to the power of the individual and how can I put this, common sense and economic sense on dealing with problems. We're not going to end that tomorrow, but I think the Trump presidency may change a lot of that for us. And Gerald, we thank you for your call from the Buckeye State of Ohio. Speaking of Ohio, ISIS now claiming responsibility for that terror attack at Ohio State University on Monday. ISIS describing the 18-year-old Somalian refugee who allegedly carried out the attack before being killed by the campus cop in Columbus as one of its soldiers, Abdul Razik Ali Artan, accused of injuring 11 people, thankfully none of them fatally, and then getting out of the car and trying to assail others with a butcher knife before he was shot and killed by that 28-year-old campus police officer there at Ohio State. Let's talk about all this with our next guest, the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy via Skype from Phoenix, Arizona. It's Zuhdi Jasser. Zuhdi is also the author of the book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. We should point out, for purposes of full disclosure, Zuhdi Jasser is my personal physician, and I first got to know him when he was serving in the Navy and a physician for those of us serving in the House and Senate on Capitol Hill. Doc, I'll come see you about medical stuff later, but let's talk, Zuhdi, about what happened in Columbus the other day, your reaction to that attack, and the reticence of the law enforcement community and what seems to be the campus community at Ohio State to call it what it is, terrorism.
Yeah, you know, my prayers are with the families and, again, with Americans as we are just sitting on edge, always wondering when the next one's going to happen. And sadly, this is the whack-a-mole program that has become Homeland Security. And yet we still don't learn our lessons. And the lessons is, at some point, America is going to have to shift, JD, from a violent extremism program where we counter this tactic to countering violent Islamism, political Islam. Every time we say, oh, how did he happen to have Imam Awlaki, who is a radicalized imam that has declared war on America, on his website? Why did he talk about Islamophobia and other fear-mongering tactics that come from some of the Islamist groups that separate Muslims out of society? A lot of these ideologies are part of them and are part of the radicalization process, and yet all we're focusing on is that last step when they want to pick up a knife, drive a truck into a crowd like they did in Nice, And this is what the magazines are telling them to do: soft targets, not to use arms because it's going to be easier to be found. They can carry a knife anywhere. So these types of soft targets to populations like universities and others are going to be seen more and more. And we need to be vetting not only those coming into this country, but Muslims that are already here. This mosque where he was at has already had 6 terror convictions, with 3 fighting jihad in Syria from that Imam Abu al-Khattab mosque in Columbus. And yet, are they being monitored? No, because of political correctness. And I think that we need to learn our lesson.
Yeah, bottom line is political correctness is national suicide. And it just, there's nothing correct about it. And yet, as you mentioned earlier, these different steps are almost the prerequisite talking points. Case in point, the campus newspaper at Ohio State sits down a few months ago with Abdul Artan in the article at the Lantern, the student newspaper, says he wanted to pray on campus, but he was afraid for his safety as a Muslim. Zuhdi, you're an adherent to Islam. You're Muslim. You see this kind of stuff where this guy tries to almost prime the pump as if he's the victim. What do you say to those people who are trying to say, wait a minute, we have to hesitate, there are legitimate concerns we have, we're going to be victimized? That kind of psychology that, I'm sorry to say, seems to be part and parcel of the preparation and the groundwork, if you will, prior to the attack we saw Monday in Columbus.
Yeah, I would say knock it off with the defensiveness. Americans have nothing to apologize for. They will find something in their propaganda to blame America for, either domestically or abroad in foreign policy, because they are, the ism that we're fighting is Islamism, theocratic Islam. They hate secular democracies. They hate liberal societies, liberty-based societies. So they're going to do anything to make Muslims not feel at home here, exaggerate the reality. And Muslims need tough love. We can no longer have this bigotry of low expectations. I mean, yesterday, there was a CNN anchor who said, oh, Americans need to wear the hijab to feel sympathy and understand what it's like to be a Muslim. Give me a break. We need therapy. We need a 12-step program to get through the denial. And as long as Americans enable that denial, we're going to put us more and more at risk, because ISIS will push radicals into those spots of weakness, because they see us to be vulnerable and will attack and attack until we get stronger and get peace. As Reagan used to say, peace through strength when talking about arms. It's peace through strength when talking about the battle of ideas against theocracy in Islam. And we need to, I hope President Trump will have this commission that he talked about against radical Islam, and that commission will focus on changing the axis from countering violent extremism to countering violent Islamism, and engaging Muslim reformers to lead this battle at the front line.
And one of the guys who's front and center is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. And Zuhdi, we appreciate your time. An invitation for you to call in at 1-877-NewsMax. Zuhdi, you mentioned President-elect Trump. He tweeted his reaction to the Ohio State attack thusly: ISIS is taking credit for the terrible stabbing attack at Ohio State University by a Somali refugee who should not have been in our country. Zuhdi, compounding that, CBS News recently reported on a first-generation Somali American, one gentleman in particular, I shouldn't call him a gentleman, the guy who was convicted of supporting terrorism. They spoke with somebody who grew up in Minneapolis and then later became a leader of an ISIS cell. Here's what this guy said. He talked about how difficult it was growing up with multiple identities. Let's look and listen.
It's different than most people, because you have all these different identities. You know, you're Somali, you're Muslim, and you're American. And so it's kind of confusing for some youth growing up in that kind of environment. The most confusing part is balancing it, balancing each one, and, you know, trying to balance each one, you know, so where you're not doing one more than the other.
Zuhdi, I hear that, and there's no more different experience than yours. Coming from a family of immigrants, you're first generation native born here in the United States. I've never heard you talk about trying to balance out being Syrian or American, being an adherent of Islam, or being a naval officer. Is this more of the kind of self-help tripe, or the I'm sorry to look askance at it, but everybody seems to forget you got to assimilate to a society. What am I missing here? About 30 seconds, Zuhdi.
Actually, this is the core problem. Our youth programs that we do at the American Islamic Forum for Democracy are about telling Muslims and teaching them that the only thing we would ever die for is America, that we are American first, and everything else, we happen to be Muslim, we happen to be Syrian, we happen to be Arabic. The other identities don't even compete, because what gives us our rights to be free and be human beings is that Constitution, our government, our military, and this great country. That's how we counter it. We don't just apologize for America. We actually say we have to promote Americanism within Muslim communities, and America is not doing any of that right now in our Homeland Security operation.
Got it. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, Guts Up American, today from Phoenix. Zuhdi, we appreciate your time. More of your calls in this day of history. Right